Hello everyone, Mr. Gentleman here, and I want to discuss Yakuza 7's biggest surprise, that the combat will be turn-based. For those who have never played a Yakuza game, they are brawler RPGs that take place in modern-day Japan, and usually center around a district. Most of the time Kamurocho, a fictional version of the real Kabukichi district in Tokyo. The stories are highly dramatic, the comedic moments are patently absurd, and the action goes between real-life martial arts to explosive, big heat moves. And the biggest piece of news is that after 15 years, and something like 13 games if we count remakes and spin-offs, the combat for Yakuza 7 will be turn-based. We now live in a universe where Final Fantasy is no longer menu-based, and now Yakuza is. To give my quick opinion, I do personally wish the series remained the same and would just improve on the combat they already had, which is what they've been doing year after year. For their most recent game, Judgment, they made significant changes that made that game feel unique to itself, even though it was based on what Yakuza has always been doing. But while the turn-based overlords are here, I'm going to enjoy this run while it lasts. With that said, Yakuza, being a series that really likes to hone in on Japanese culture, has referenced Dragon Quest before. In Yakuza 0, which takes place in 1988, the year that Dragon Quest III released, you have a quest where Dragon Quest III, or as the game calls it, Arakure Quest III, is on sale and people are lined up, and a kid's copy gets stolen again and again, which is actually based on real-life incidents where people's copies of Dragon Quest were stolen on the launch day. And for Yakuza 7, Ichiban, the main character, his voice actor asked if he could directly reference Dragon Quest, with the character saying that they're going to fight for a happy ending just like Dragon Quest. With all that said, let's take a look at what series producer Masayoshi Yokoyama had to say when detailing this game's combat. To begin, he says, Ryuga Gotoku 7, Hikari Toyami no Yukue, various media outlets have uploaded detailed articles. But I want to explain the points we highlighted yesterday one by one. Live command RPG battle means a battle where, in a constantly changing situation, your commands affect the state of play. In a normal RPG, your enemies and opponents stand still until given a command to attack or whatever, and then they come back to life. Ryu 7's battle is different. So what he seems to say, and going along with the video, is that the situation of battle is constantly changing, kind of like in a real movie fight. That it's constantly about presence and awareness. We've seen movement in turn-based combat before. Actually, it's in a lot of games now, but most notably, it's been in the Legend of Heroes games, such as Trails of Cold Steel, but even then it's on a plain battle area. He seems to be implying the situation will be constantly changing, and in the video we can see characters scattered all over a certain area, all taking part in the fight in an organic fashion rather than the characters being lined up. Next he says specifically, the system is people moving in real time while fighting in a real town. Yakuza games are known for their context-sensitive actions, so this is no surprise. He seems to want the fight to really feel like it takes place in the city, which makes sense. Yakuza is very much about diving into districts such as Kamurocho, so the battle system being rooted within that city makes sense. But what I think is immediately noticeable is the sense of dynamism through the fight. That despite things menu-based, everything looks like a real fight, but one that occurs at the pace of a chess match. This has been attempted before. Hybrid Heaven for Nintendo 64 comes to mind, but the way this game's system plays out feels so much more natural. He says after that, except for some bosses, enemy encounters start when you reach the enemy's position. So depending on how the encounters start, your position at the start of the battle will differ, and it could give you an advantage or a disadvantage. Note enemies can also hide and suddenly ambush you from cover. This is really interesting, and it's where positioning comes in. Like the enemy could be far away and he could have things that throw at you, or maybe you have things to throw at him. Or maybe you have specific moves that are really good for long range. Aside from the occasional gun, long-range combat isn't something we've seen much in the Yakuza series, so I wonder how they'll handle that in this game. Because for variety's sake, you will need some kind of equivalent for the archer or hunter. And it could leave a lot up to creativity on your part, or on certain moves that they'll create for you, that will allow you to close the gap between you and the enemy. He goes on to say, when you go into battle, your opponents and allies will continue to move around within the arena. They don't stop. Characters can move towards enemies or away from them. Of course, you're fighting in a town, so when they move they could bump into things on the street, like bikes or signboards, and knock them over. And this is where a lot of the context and location sensitivity comes in. First off, it's really interesting that while you're doing certain actions, everyone else is still moving around. So when it finally gets to someone's turn, they won't be in the place they were before. And that means a big theme of this game's combat is adaptation. You have to adapt to wherever your characters ended up. Maybe they were fortunate enough to end up next to a certain weapon they could use. Maybe they ended up close to the enemy, maybe they ended up far away. And you have to think about what their moves in their move list can and can't do within that situation. And so that leaves a lot of potential as to how varied the combat will be. You know, in a way it reminds me of Chrono Trigger. In Chrono Trigger, the enemies were moving around all throughout the fight, though your characters stood still. And ever since that game, I thought it would always be the natural evolution of the Chrono series, of you moving around while the enemy moves around, and you choosing to use certain moves within the changing context of that fight. So it's interesting to see that after so many decades later, we're finally seeing a follow-up on those ideas. It's just funny that we're getting it from the company I least expected it from. Next, going on, he says all of that movement is managed by the physics of Ryuga Gotoko's studio's Dragon Engine. And also, just like in the series up until now, there are things on the battlefield that might get in your way or can be used as weapons. Note, some of them are items you've used in previous games. This is something I pretty much alluded to before. In Yakuza games, there will be plenty of weapons and objects throughout the city you could use, or a variety of environments you could use. My favorite from the recent game Judgment is how you could put the swings to use. But he said we'd be seeing some old favorites, and I'm pretty sure that means the players have come back. And if you've never played a Yakuza game, every one includes the players. And Kiryu, the main character of those games, him taking one and pulling out some poor guy's tooth. No matter how many times you see it, it's still painful every time. So we're pretty much getting that, but in the context of a turn-based fight. And I hope we get some pretty good new items. It's partly decided by turn order and character parameters, but it's not the case that the result will be the same whoever you use to attack the enemy. If you use run-up to attack someone at a distance, there's a possibility that other enemies will get in your way and block you. This is really interesting, and it makes so many things in the game situational. What your actions in your menu can do in that moment. You have to think about how enemies are situated and positioned around you, like in an action game, or like in certain board games really. And you have to consider how that will affect what you choose. In the video, we can see a guy attacking someone, and someone tries to get in his way but he dodges them. But I wonder, what if he didn't dodge and that person was hit? Would that interrupt your attack and cancel it out? So I think that's pretty fascinating, and it leaves a lot of potential for some very interesting situations. I also want to mention that this reminds me of Final Fantasy X-2. If you remember in that game, which was an ATB game, if you and an enemy attacked at the same time, they would try to attack you and you would interrupt their move. I remember seeing that as a kid and thought that I had imagined it, but then a wolf leapt at Pain again, and she slashed him in midair, and I was so impressed with that. But then Square went on and they just started to make action games instead, so they never really followed up on this idea. So again, it seems like these concepts that RPG fans have wanted to be elaborated on for years are finally going to see their growth, but again from an unlikely place. Next he says, when attacking an enemy at a distance, there are town objects that can completely change the situation. If there are bicycles lying around, you can kick them at the enemy to hit them, or pick them up and batter the enemy with them. Note, such actions are dependent on character role and characteristics. So we've pretty much covered this idea at this point. I'm just curious as to how far he'll go with changing the situation. Like, I'd love it if you could set a room on fire or something like that and that really scares the enemies. The one thing he mentions here that's new is that certain actions will be dependent on character roles and characteristics. In older games, certain characters could only do certain things. For example, Saejima from Yakuza 4 and 5, only he could pick up motorcycles and use them. And there were certain weapons that only certain characters had mastery over. So it seems you'll be thinking about a combination of class, the area you're in, and positioning. It seems like all of these things will come into play when you're making your decisions and choices. We also see positioning leading to things like combination attacks. And again, that reminds me of Chrono Trigger, or Phantasy Star 4, whichever one you played first. And Yakuza has had many elaborate team moves, so I'm curious to see how far they'll go with this. He then says, you also have to deal with other enemies obstructing you or attacking you while you're trying to attack someone else. For example, if you're doing a run-up attack on a faraway enemy, other enemies are likely to get in your way while you're running. One way to deal with that, just like in the series before now, is to use wide-range attacks, or use collateral damage attacks, to take out multiple enemies at the same time. So in Yakuza there are certain combos, fighting styles, and heat moves that could deal damage to multiple enemies. And he seems to be saying that's one option to dealing with the battlefield. I'm just wondering what the cost of those things will be. In most Yakuza games you had a heat bar, and when it filled up you could use certain heat moves, and things such as that. Also, if you knock an enemy into the road, they can get hit by passing cars. Of course, that will damage them. So you're fighting in this space where people and things are constantly moving, which is why we call the system Live Command RPG Battle. And again, this brings positioning in the city into play. Obviously walls will play a part, and other structures, as heat moves involved with them have been in every game. And they've only gotten more elaborate. In Judgment, there's one where you could use a heat move on a certain avenue, and it will knock the enemy into a car that belongs to a Yakuza, and they'll pull him into the window and ride him off. And that one's hilarious. And there seems to be quite a few cause and effect chains. That you can do this, but this can happen. That you have to deal with the fact that in a real fight someone could ambush you. Or that things will happen that will just change your plan of attack. Like you can see in the video, someone getting up from the ground and having to attack from that position. And there are also some skills that require action battle style button mashing, etc. to perform. And for those players who just want to get through the fight quickly, there's an auto mode too. Note, however, this mode may produce some unexpected results. So button mashing for certain moves is not surprising, that's a Yakuza staple, though in my opinion they do it better than most games. And auto battle is not reliable, also not surprising. Never trust auto battle. Next up, he says, all of these controls are possible because of improvements made to the Dragon Engine through the series up till now. And the real-time physics management means we could create a battle system unlike anything we've made before. Also, as enemies get stronger, they'll also get sneakier, so you might find other characters start running away if they're in trouble. So he seems to say the Dragon Engine is what makes all of these dynamic actions possible. And it's a pretty good looking system. I do think it had a lot of programming issues in 6 and in the remake of 2, but it does seem to work very well for this turn-based system. I admit though I miss how beefy the characters used to look in the older games. But enemies getting sneakier does sound interesting, and I'm wondering what that will lead to. In Yakuza Kiwami, Majima could start a battle from various areas, so maybe we'll get something like that. Maybe enemies will jump from like the top of rooftops, or maybe they can pop out of sewers, or maybe they can just put the environment to better use. Next, he says, regarding yesterday's announcements about the battle system, we've only shown you the very basics so far. Because you can change roles using Hello Work 2, there's a greater variety of skills than there is in anything we've done before. And there's a lot more things like special moves we haven't made public yet. So he seems to be saying there's going to be quite a few moves in the game. I'm looking forward to that. But very interestingly is what he says about the class system. So in Dragon Quest, to change your class you have to go to a certain place. Most recently it's been localized as All Trades Abbey. In real-life Japan there is a government-sponsored company called Hello Work, which helps people look for jobs. So apparently you can go to them to change your class, which is very amusing. I do wonder what the classes will be though. Will they be based on fighting styles from older games? Or will they be based on the classes from the RTS minigame from Yakuza 6 and the remake of 2, where you had gunners, brawlers, and things like that? And I imagine he mentions the greater variety of moves, since these people who can be added to your party need to have a very diverse moveset, and that moveset has to have attacks that work with the environment and positioning and all the things he's talked about. So it looks like the work for Ryuga Gotoku Studios is going to be a really heavy load this time around. Lastly, he says, the whole team is working hard so that you'll be able to experience the live Command RPG battle system for yourself at the Tokyo Game Show from September 12th. So please come and try it out if you can. And for those of you who can't come, we're working hard on videos, etc., so we can properly show you what it's all about. So that seems to be it. This looks like it's shaping up to be a very fascinating system. Turn-based combat is something that's been evolving since the genre first came into being. And it's interesting that so many ideas that people have imagined before are now coming into fruition with this game. So, I'm looking forward to see what it is they can do. I hope you are as well. If you have never played a Yakuza game before, go ahead and pick up Yakuza 0. It shouldn't cost that much at this point, and quite honestly, it is one of the best, if not the best game for the PS4. It certainly has my approval. After that, the remakes of 1 and 2 have had their prices slashed, and 3, 4, and 5 come together in a bundle for $60. That's $20 per remastered PS3 game, which is honestly a really excellent value. Right now, only 3 is up on PSN, but you can pay the $60 and download 4 and 5 when they're ready, or you can just buy the physical bundle when it comes out in February. Anyway, that seems to be all. Please like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment if you can. Thank you for watching, and God bless you all. Ah!